So good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is our third time attempting to stream. The first time we did it only privately, then the second time we tried to do it publicly, um, and your audio was out, right? Or was it my audio? Your
No, you
audio.
muted me. You
Okay.
muted me. Yeah. So, um,
This time I've got
so
to listen to you.
so we got a couple rules on the message board. First of all, be as uncharitable as possible.
We didn't
Have
agree on
goodwill
these
toward,
rules beforehand, so
have goodwill towards one another. If you have side discussions, uh, that's fine. But please focus on the content at the same
content.
time. Yeah, it's a paradox. Um, I probably have to have that open in case there's someone listening and actually says something, or are you seeing that
I have
on your
access
end?
to the chat. Um,
Okay, all
when
right,
you live stream, I can't show you the screen right now because that would kind of ruin the stream. But
yeah, that's fine.
um, when I start streaming on YouTube Studio, it has the chat on the right, as well as the statistics for our connection, stream health, and all of that. And it looks like we're doing
Uh-huh.
pretty well right now. And it looks like it's not really dropping any frames or anything. So
Well, if please realize, Hong Kong viewers, please turn on your international
this
translator
again.
device so that we know what you're writing. And other than that, we got every other language covered. So
Sure. We
yeah.
could just use
Chinese,
Google Translate, I guess,
yeah. Chinese is just the most difficult. It's the most difficult for me, and you know why?
because you're not Chinese and you don't speak Chinese.
Right, that's what makes it hard. So,
Yeah, pretty rough to be able
yeah,
to understand it if you don't speak it.
yeah. So, what's on your mind? What's going on today?
Um, I'm not sure. That's the beauty of streaming is you don't have to have a clear direction until um you figure it out. But anyway, I do have something, and I gotta pull it up so hopefully it doesn't crash the stream, but it might freeze for a second. So I don't
Okay.
know why I even
Well,
closed it.
well,
Hold on 1 second.
just so just so everyone is aware, it's thundering and lightning where I'm at, and it's thundering and lightning where Pinchy's at. And so, if for some reason we disappeared, it's either the power went out or we were raptured. So,
I think that's the most
um,
likely. Um, okay, so it should. Yeah, it looks like it didn't freeze or anything. So
okay.
hopefully, me opening this document won't. You can hear my computer struggling,
Hmm.
but it looks like it didn't affect the stream. That's really neat. Oh, now it says encoding overload. 1 second.
Encoding overload.
Please, please stay upstream.
I
Um,
wonder if you
I
just
think
if you just
our only view is yours right now.
um I'm gonna comment.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just kidding. All right. So it looks like it's fine now. I just had to open this document, and that kind of made things slow. Uh, so 1 second. It says, as such, viewers will experience buffering. Looks like it should be fine, but
Mhm.
I don't know
Well,
why the.
I
Okay,
closed
there we go.
I closed I closed YouTube. That's the new modern YouTube. Uh, that's not really modern. That would be like the Surfer Dude, which was Surfer Dude was like in the, I don't know, 80s or 90s, and
Well, it's
probably for
still a
some
thing.
people who were really surfer dudes, it was probably like in the 60s and 70s. But those of us who weren't fortunate enough to live near a coastline, we never did surfers. So they probably surfer language has probably been that way since the beginning. When Grog uh, during prehistoric times was surfing, he probably said "yo, Oleg" or
Okay,
whatever.
let's move on.
Okay, whatever.
So, so anyway, I started this. Hold on. Why is it struggling? I just closed a window. Irritating. Okay, well, anyway, that aside, um, I don't even need this open. Why? Scatterbrain. Alright, so I started this document, and it's kind of all over the place. I started with an initial idea that I think is worth uh, delving deep into, but I didn't end up going that direction with this. And I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
share everything because obviously I want to complete this and write it and finish it. Um, but right now it's at the beginning stage, so it will probably go in more directions in the future. So I started with the concept of man seeking to be um, basically like God um, in a prideful manner, seeking his own way and his own uh, morality and arbitrary will. And that instead, what we see is that God Himself comes down and becomes a man. And so it's kind of like a reversal of expectations of man seeking to become like God and, uh, like the Tower of Babel, and that God actually comes down as a human being in the person of Jesus Christ, um, reversing that expectation. And there's a lot there to talk about, like the uh, the folly of the devil, and how when you think about the curse in the garden, it says you will eat dust the rest of your life, as well as I will put enmity between you and the woman. Um, dust. The reason why I brought up the dust thing is because um, Adam basically means dust, which means man. So I think there's a connection there. But anyway, so there's enmity between the serpent and the woman, and then also the offspring, which is Jesus, who will crush the head of the serpent. Um, and so what the devil expects is he basically hates man. We've talked about this before. He is out for man because God has um, given mankind a certain authority in his creation, and uh, he loves mankind in a way that is unexpected for the spiritual hosts, specifically the fallen spiritual hosts. Um, and so, with his hatred in mind against the human race, which you see in Scripture from beginning to end, um, why would you expect God to become a man, right? Like to step down into the race that you hate, the human race, and basically the a man is who crushed the head of the serpent, and that man is not only just some random man; it's also God in the flesh, and so the expectation for the devil is not like he hates the physical creation, and well, I guess he hates everything anyway, but he especially hates God's favorite creatures, which are on earth, and the thing is, just like the Gnostics are like thinking God is so beyond this physical world, he would never stoop down to this level of filth in their mind, right? Because the physical world is basically completely evil. And in a similar way, I'm sure that the devil looks at the physical creation in a very similar way. Like, that's lower than the spiritual level. And so man is lower than everything in his mind because he's physical. And so to think that God, who is not physical, would stoop down into the physical in order to defeat the devil, it's a reversal of expectations, which is why I think Paul uses the language of um, it's the folly of God is wiser than man. It's basically it's a uh, it's a reversal of expectations. I said that's an entirely different subject, but uh, I decided to go uh,
Hmm.
full speed into that topic. Do you have any thoughts on that before I move on to what I
Um,
was gonna say?
no, why don't you go into what you were going to say rather than me take off into
Well,
another
why
direction?
not? I mean, if you have
Okay.
thoughts on it, we might as well explore
Look,
whatever direction you want to take it.
yeah. It occurs to me when you think about it's all you and I were talking about infinity on a little bit on Wednesday, but the Lord condescending to anything would have been. I mean, anything less than God would have been a condescension. But condescending to humans uh, or anything for that matter, it's it's an infinite. There's an infinite chasm between creator and creation. So that's just an amazing thing right there. It's just okay. That's already showing his uh, infinite uh, infiniteness. Let's just leave it at that. Um, and maybe because it's so infinite, it's not even something that the devil even expected. I don't know if you've heard that before. That he's kind of surprised that um, uh, blew his mind. The devil goes and tries to corrupt man, and then God says, "Well, I'll just become man and then deal with you." Didn't even occur,
Right.
maybe.
Yeah, that was
Um,
precisely my point.
oh, cool. Then the other thing that occurs to me is um, that the devil is always a corrupter. So if he was going to fight against God, you would think, okay, the devil, hey, let's devil get him and his angels and go, okay, we're going to be opening up a wartime factory. I'm going to be making weapons against God. And the reality is, he can't, he has no, the only thing he can attack is uh there's four possibilities things that basically he could attack. He could attack God, useless. That'd be okay. He could attack creation. And what I mean by that is universe. He really can't affect that much. The only thing that's going to ever end the universe is going to be man. Not man. Strike that. It's going to be God. Man might try. He might pollute. He might do this or whatever. But guess what? Seed time and harvest will continue. Um, so he can't really uh, destroy the material universe. He can't really destroy. He can't get a weapon against us, other than if we were to willing to accept his lie, which makes us less than what we are. And the first casualty in Satan's battle was himself, because as soon as he entered into that realm of I'm going to fight, I'm going to rebel, he became less than what he was made to be. He denied reality, which was to serve, know, love, and serve God. And he denied that as real. And so his first casualty was himself. And then he decided, okay, I can't really bring. And so my whole point being, he can't bring anything to the table. You and I talk about how evil is actually an absence of good, and that discussion. Well, evil also can only corrupt what is. They don't. It doesn't bring anything. I mean, this might seem obvious, but it's an important point. Uh, uh, he can't. He doesn't bring anything to the table. The only thing he can do is lessen or work with what God has already created and
Yeah,
attack that.
yeah. He can only twist what is good, um, to further his ends, and so every evil action that he attempts to perform is simply just a privation of what is proper. So it's not as if he can make something new. God is the only creator, right? And this applies not only to the devil. This applies to any evil by any creatures. It's not as if humankind can invent new things in the sense of that's not already part of the creation, um, but he can only use what God has given him to even be able to use, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
um, there's nothing that man can do outside of what God expects or what God can control. And the thing is, existence itself is good, right? Well, we know this from logic, and Thomas Aquinas really uh, goes through this and proves it very, very well. And I don't have time to talk about that right now. But um, it is true that everything that exists is good in some way, to some extent. The only way that it can be considered bad is as far as it's lacking what is proper to it, as you pointed out. And so any evil is simply an absence of what is properly there. But the thing is, that's not an
Or should be there.
addition. That's not an addition to anything. That's simply a removal of what is and what should be.
Mm-hmm.
Not as introducing something new into the system. So that's basically what you're getting at. With the devil, things are even worse for him because he has to go to God himself and ask to be able to do anything. As we see in Job, he he literally can't do anything unless God allows him to do it. So for him, things are even worse for him. Uh, he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't even have the freedom to make his own decisions on his own time. So for him, things are even worse. But yeah, I don't know if that really strengthens or adds anything to what you said, but I think that's kind of what you were getting at.
Yeah, yeah. I was just uh, he can only corrupt and only can make something less than it is. And then once the corruption starts, without some kind of avenue of redemption or forgiveness or grace, such a debilitating effect. So once the devil made that uh, step to become less than what he is, that just that and as far as we know, angels are super intelligent and amazing because they were created and hovered closer to God than we have experientially 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 anyway. And so they being closer to God, they're even that more brilliant. And so he had farther to fall, but he's still pretty brilliant. But all these years, it's just got to be so damaging to his intellect and to his will and to his reason that it starts to pollute everything. And so, anyway, yeah,
Well, based on the way that we look at things, he's, as far as I am aware, most people would say that um, he is probably the most evil of all things. But even saying that, uh, even in saying that, we have to recognize that everything God has created is good in some way, and maybe for him, his moral action is totally depraved, right? And he's in, unable to do what is good. But there's this distinction of like the fact that things exist, things are good because they exist. Um, and things are more good if they exist in their proper order, right? But he is only good insofar as he exists. And I don't know if that makes any sense to everyone, but basically, he's still a creature, and therefore he is good. But that doesn't mean that anything that he does ever is good in any way. It's only to say, even him, there's something that is good, and that is that he has being. And that's like the only thing. But anyway, that's not really an important sidetrack. Um,
Hmm.
do you have any other thoughts, or do you think we can move on to my other
Yeah,
discussion?
yeah, go on to your thing.
Okay, so I'm not going to read everything like I said. Um, basically, this has become a writing about the incarnation in general, and not specifically about the reversal of expectations in God becoming man. Um, so I'm not entirely sure if I have any like specific direction in mind. Um, and so I might do this in reverse order because I do have a discussion above about something that might seem a little bit um, out of this main discussion.
Okay.
Um, okay, here we go. Um, so in the middle of the argument above that I make, and I'm not going to rehash that right now. I have this middle section that is about God having the knowledge of good and evil. So when I say God having the knowledge of good and evil, I'm talking about a specific verse which says after Adam and Eve sinned, um, it says that God said, um, basically, let us remove them from the garden so that they can't eat of the tree of life and live forever. Um, and then he talks about right there how he has become like God in knowing good and evil. It says that in there. I don't remember what verse
Mhm.
exactly. So the question is, well, if that's the issue that Adam and Eve have is having the knowledge of good and evil, and that's a bad thing, how is it that God is not um, in some way
Affected.
affected by the knowledge of good and evil, um, so that he would also be bad or something like that? So that's kind of like the main question. And so I have an answer that I don't know if it's sufficient, but it is an answer. And that's what the this middle paragraph is about. So I'll read through it. It's not all formulated exactly as I want to, and we talked about it behind the scenes, and I haven't changed the wording. So I'll read it in a second. I just got to drink and then I'll begin.
All right. Well, what might jump out to somebody is that the question that you're posing, they might just say, "Well, it didn't affect him because he's God." But you wanna try to understand,
What is it
you
about
know,
God that precludes him from um, being affected by the knowledge of good and evil? Um,
right?
and so,
Is there something we can learn from
right,
that
yeah,
inquiry? Yeah.
right. Because the difficulty though is like, so if it's bad for Adam and Eve, how is it not bad for God? Is the question. So we'll get into it real quick. So, um, but if God also had the knowledge of good and evil, how is it that he does not also die? Adam and Eve are composite beings having body and soul. Composite just means consisting of multiple things. Um, they have inner desires, um, a compulsion towards fulfillment. If they hunger, food is available to them, and thus they are satiated. If they are thirsty, they have recourse to water, which sates their thirst, and so on for all of the various desires. Um, but God, but God does not act in this same way. For Adam and Eve, the knowledge of sin informs their habits, directing them towards alternative action. For the various desires, a twisting of them is now possible. Uh, Going back to what we talked about before about the privation of what is proper as what evil is. Okay, so um, for the various desires, the twisting of them is now possible, for they are aware of both what is useful and also what is not useful. For God, he does not will what is contrary to himself. In fact, he cannot. This does not preclude him from knowing that creatures will act contrary to this will, though he is not affected by that. But for Adam and Eve, the knowledge of sin compels to sin. Another way to think of this is that God is the rule maker, and he is aware of possible failure to obey his rules. But Adam and Eve, by nature of being creatures, are not the rule makers. They're the rule followers. But in this case, wow, that's loud thunder. Um, but in this case, they have taken it upon themselves to direct their actions. And this is why God is not affected by the knowledge of good and evil. Um, this is a reason why. This isn't the full. This isn't the only answer that can be given, but this is the one I gave. Um, there's a lot here that I think it would be worth talking about. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's some missing details that I didn't quite put together as well as I can. But let me just uh, discuss this one part about the rulemaking aspect. So, I've heard this analysis, and I want to hear what you think after I say it. I've heard this analysis of the sin in the garden as basically the knowledge of good and evil is the ability to make or sorry, I'm trying to think of the right phrasage. That okay, so knowledge of good and evil is about morality and about the um who I'm trying to think of the exact wording because it was an interesting thought. But basically, Adam and Eve, when they sin, they take it upon themselves uh, to decide what morality is and what is moral for them to do. And so they've taken it upon themselves and given themselves an authority that they don't have, which is I want to decide what is right and wrong. Whereas God is the one who can decide what is right and wrong and can give rules and regulations because that's his proper place in comparison to us. We don't have that as our proper place. And so the knowledge of good and evil talks about is basically the idea of uh, determining morality, and the reason why it's good for God is because it's proper for him to do so, and the reason why it's bad for Adam and Eve is because it's improper for them to do so. So I've heard that explanation before, and that's kind of the idea that I'm getting at in that part is it's not bad for God because he is the proper rule maker. It's bad for us because we are not. So what do you think about that? I you probably heard that
Well,
analysis too, but yeah,
yeah. On one side, you could ask, okay, so this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the name of it.
yeah,
The Lord tells them that do not eat from it. Um, what's interesting, and I'm just thinking out loud. Okay, so um, um, he did not tell them that is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that makes you smarter. He just says that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and so when Adam and Eve did partake, the question has to be: did they become smarter? Did they gain more knowledge, or And someone could say, yeah, because they said, they saw that they were naked and they didn't see it before. Well, you could argue that they saw nakedness in a different light because obviously they knew that each other didn't have sport coats on. So, um, so then you have to ask yourself, then you think, okay, what is this? What did they gain or did they lose? And I would contend that they lost something. So, for example, if the Lord told Adam, "Hey, don't take the $100 I gave you and buy $20 with it because that's dumb." Okay, but he called that $20 the knowledge of good and evil or whatever. So Adam took the $100 and bought the $20. Well, he got the $20, but he gave up $80. So he lost something. So in some regard, and uh, uh, you wonder what did they gain? Obviously, I mean, we know in hindsight they didn't gain anything. Um, and whatever they knew started to be their minds and their intellect were darkened, and so they lost. And
Yeah.
so to come back to your question about it, it, they made a bad moral choice to eat of the tree because they exchanged the truth for a lie. And so it was they exchanged God's truth for their truth, and or the truth that the devil offered to them. And so that exchange represented that first bad moral choice, and a bad moral choice maybe could be described as making a non-virtuous choice, or making a choice for a bad instead of a good, or making for lesser good than the highest good. And so that is like a so it did affect their choices. I don't know if that's
Well,
what you were thinking there.
can you apply that to the difference between God having the knowledge of good and evil and Adam and Eve having the knowledge of good and evil? Can you
Well,
contrast that?
you can in a sense in this regard. God can't make 2 + 2 = 4.
You mean
And
five?
so someone will, or yeah, 5. Uh, or anything other than 4, right? So God can't make 2 + 2 = 5. Someone to go, aha, God can't do something. It's like, no, he's not a liar. He's always consistent with the truth. He always chooses the ultimate good. And so he would be denying himself if he arbitrarily just decided, okay, today it's 5, you know? And so contrasting with what you said, um it's whatever choice God makes, it's always going to be the highest choice. Therefore, it can never be a poor moral choice.
Yeah. So how does that apply to God having the knowledge of good and evil and Adam and Eve having the knowledge of good and evil?
Well, in what regard do you mean? I mean,
Well, I mean that's what the
obviously,
question is about.
okay.
Um, if God has the knowledge of good and evil, which is stated right after the fall happens, it says man is now like us in knowing and having the knowledge of good and evil. Um, and so how is there? What is the difference between Adam and Eve having the knowledge of good and evil and God having the knowledge of good and evil?
Well, you could say there's many differences because of the material world and the physical. Uh, God is immaterial, but that would only answer part of the question. That would suffice for a basic answer, but that doesn't display holiness. I would say the reason it didn't affect him is because he's truth itself, and so uh,
Yeah, but what does it
again, that's
mean
not
for
an
him to have the knowledge of good and evil? What does that mean?
Well, define what you mean, because I'm not.
What does
I
it
kind of know
mean
what you're.
that God has the knowledge of good and evil? Is what the question is.
He can know all that is,
Yeah, I
or
know,
that's
but
all that's
what is the
possible.
knowledge that he has? That that's what the question is. Is what
Well,
does it
would
mean for God to have the knowledge of good and evil?
well he can know. He knows that creatures can make bad choices.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at with the first part of
Hmm.
this paragraph. The second part is what I'm really wondering about, which is I was talking about how God is the proper rule maker, Adam and Eve are not. So when it says that God has the knowledge of good and evil, it's more about the determination of moral choice versus having a new knowledge that of specifically evil. Um, and the reason why that's a question is because there's this passage. Well, there's multiple reasons, but there's this passage that talks about. I believe it's a prophecy about Jesus, and it talks about before he is able to choose the good and reject evil. If I remember, that's what it says. And then it talks. It uses a similar phrasage there of knowing good and evil, if I remember correctly. And so the thought is there it means being able to choose what is moral, and that's what um, the knowledge of good and evil really means is um, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase it, but I think that might not add to my point. I guess just going back to what I actually wrote,
Hmm.
I point out that God is the proper rule maker, and so he is the one that can give rules, moral rules. Adam and Eve are not the rule makers, so they can't give rules of morality and make their own. And so the point that I'm making is it is proper for God to determine uh, a law of morality for Adam and Eve, but it is not proper for them to make it for themselves, and that's what the difference is between God having the knowledge of good and evil and Adam and Eve having the knowledge of good and evil. And that's what I was
Okay,
asking
then.
you, what you thought.
Well, and that's some of the fact that uh, Adam and Eve wanted to make the rules. So that's another rejected reality that they are not the rule makers. That they are a response to a different for to a preeminent activity, and they're never the first cause of any action in a sense. And so, uh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what
Uh,
the point of this paragraph was to talk about, which was um, what is the difference between God having the knowledge of good and evil and Adam and Eve having the knowledge of good and evil? And so we can acknowledge that Adam and Eve lose something, and you helpfully brought that up. Um, but I guess the question was about in what manner they can lose something by having the knowledge of good and evil, but God doesn't lose anything by having the knowledge of good and evil. Um, and I don't think that it's referring to God's pre knowledge. Well, actually, hold on. Okay, now I'm contradicting my paragraph. So let me put it this way: this specific answer is not a question about whether or not God knows what will happen. This specific answer. The other answer does address that, but this one doesn't address that. It's simply a discussion about God um, being the proper rule maker and Adam and Eve not, and that's the distinction, at least in this aspect. There is an aspect, and I talked about it here, about how God is also not affected by it because um, he is not composite like Adam and Eve are, and is not physical, and does not have compulsion towards action, whereas Adam and Eve do. And that therefore, even if God has knowledge about evil actions, uh, that does not mean that he himself is going to be affected by those in a negative way. But anyway, I might be rambling. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, no, no. Well, the thing is, it's right to point out. Okay, one of the reasons why God is not affected. I mean, I don't think it's the. I don't think it's a reason, but it's. Let me. How can I explain? I don't think it's the reason. But someone could say, well, there's obviously a difference between Adam and Eve and God,
Mm-hmm.
creature versus creator. Okay, so but you could point out, well, as you're investigating, you go like, well, maybe this is the reason why, because he's not. So then the next step would someone would go like, okay, so he's immaterial as best as we can understand that. He just is. Well, aren't the angels immaterial? And so then you can go like, well, Satan fell, but he doesn't have a physical body like we do. So it can't simply be tied to this fleshly body and appetites. So then you go, okay, and what you're trying to do is I think you are you want to avoid the easy answer, which it's the true answer, but God is God. It's by definition he would not be affected by it, but you still want to look at that and go like, okay, but what is the reasonings to that I could foster or create that might tell me something uh, about who God is and about who we are and why we do what we do, you know? But I don't know.
Well,
That's
I think it begs the question. If you say God is God, yeah, but the question is more about like, in what way does he is he um not affected by it, right? And like you said, that's a question that we uh, have, right? And it's not necessarily wrong to have the question, but ultimately it comes down to God's nature. Um, but simply saying God is God as the answer, and I know that you're not saying that that's the only answer we should give, but yeah, I mean that's true. But it begs the
well,
question.
the other thing that uh, I don't think. Well, to go on a different way, the question comes to okay, so if the knowledge of good and evil didn't affect God, then well, a lot of questions come. Then why did it affect the creatures that he made in his image? And um, and then you have to ask, and then why? Since he said all the trees in the garden were good, um, but he pointed out one tree of all of them. You know, don't eat this one. And 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 then he talked about the tree of life. And so one could say, well, okay, if 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 God and I don't think it begs a question. It just it goes back to the definition of God. God has the knowledge of good and evil, but it doesn't affect them. So then, is it possible that it just wasn't the time for the man and woman were not prepared for whatever that knowledge was, because it was in the garden, and so maybe at some point, just like I have a vehicle, but if I have a 10-year-old child, it's still not for him to drive yet because he doesn't have the capability of dealing with it or operating with the knowledge of driving a car. And so, and I don't mean to be going around and around, but uh, and
Well,
and so there.
that's a possibility. I've heard that before. Certainly. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not sure. It depends on how we define the knowledge of good and evil. Because the distinction I was giving was about who has the proper authority to make rules, right? And the thing is, Adam and Eve would never be have the authority to do it in the same way God does, in making their
Right.
own morality. And so, if you think about it in that sense, then it would be never proper for Adam and Eve to have the knowledge of good and evil because they aren't God. But if we consider then the situation of Adam and Eve in the garden, um, I've heard this before, and I want to know what you think. We might have talked about this before, but that instead of the reward being eventually knowing the knowledge of good and evil for their action, it would be having access to the tree of life forever. Would be the uh, if they had obeyed, not eaten of that tree, that God would have continued to give them the tree of life forever, and that they would live continually before Him, and that if they had obeyed, because some people have said that Adam and Eve had not the access to the tree of life beforehand, and then when they sin, then they give up the the power of the tree to live forever. Because obviously it says then God sent them out from the garden and then protected it with the fiery sword. What was I getting at? Oh, but that they would be strengthened in their faith and resolved to continue uh, to be in relationship with God, and that would have been the reward of their obedience.
Yeah, it's um, it seems even more strong than just strengthened. They'd be invincible.
Right? Yeah, it would
And
know.
so
Yeah, they would. Yeah, that's a good thing
yeah,
to point out.
and I for one don't believe they had eaten of the tree of life, but and I believe this sin happened really quickly in the beginning, um, and at the very beginning, in fact,
I do have a
and
question about that, but we can
yeah,
revisit that
go
when
ahead.
you're done with your point.
Oh, and um, the again the knowledge. Uh, well, in some regards, when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they found out what it means to be in contradiction to the truth. They found what it is to accept a lie in exchange of the truth. They found out what it is, what it feels like, and so they did find out. And so but anyway, go I lost where I was going, but go
I'm
to your
sorry.
question. No, that's all right.
I didn't mean to distract you. I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget that because I wanted to revisit it. So the question is, if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil at that point, before that, would they have lived forever? Because in Scripture it says that through one man entered death into the world. And so I think that refers not only to spiritual death, but also physical death. I think it refers to both. So the question is, would they have lived forever before the fall?
Oh, I think so.
So, what was the point of the tree of life? If they would have been able to live forever anyway, um, they had access to the tree of life. God never said, don't eat of it. So, I guess what's the point of the tree of the knowledge, or not tree of knowledge of good and evil? What's the point of the tree of life even existing if Adam and Eve would already uh, exist forever?
Well, I would answer that the easiest answer for how I'm operating today as far as my thinking, but the easiest answer to me would be to look at the Eucharist. And so um, we know that we have Christ in our heart when by faith and when we professes, but we eat his flesh and blood. That's more intimate than that's another level of intimacy. He is truly in us. And and we are truly in Him. And so the tree of life is so Adam and Eve did not have, they weren't partaking of the Eucharist, but the tree of life kind of is a foreshadowing of that coming gift. And so um, Adam and Eve were like excellent runners, and they could run forever. But now they're going to be excellent runners and run forever, let's say, because of the tree of life. But it's going to be an actual part of them and not just simply God moving them with his hand fast. I don't know if that answers the question,
Well,
but
no, I it does to a certain extent. I completely agree with the comparison with the Eucharist. I would say one of the main emphases of the Eucharist is being in fellowship. What I mean by that is you are in relationship with God, and that is one of the big emphases of it. Um, and the idea of the strengthening of resolve and will towards following Christ as a result of the nourishment of the Eucharist. Um, I think it hinges on the fact that there's that intimate connection, right, with you guys, with them together, with Christ and um, those that partake of it, and
mm-hmm.
I do, I, I do see that comparison and analogy with the tree of life, but that's actually part of the reason why I think they had access to the tree of life before, and that they had eaten of the tree of life before, because I think the tree of life is not only a representation, it is the act of fellowship with God, and I think that they were able to partake of it, and they did partake of it because they were in relationship with God, and that they continued in it until they fell. And so that's why I think that the tree of life, they had access to it before, because I think it perpetually gives life. I think it's a perpetual giving of life. And so I'd ask you, like, do you believe that each time you partake of the Eucharist, it's actually doing something every single time? It's not like it doesn't represent a one time action. It's not like, oh, I'm having it today and it's simply a one time uh, strengthening of the will and giving of life. But one of the reasons why you continue doing it's a perpetual um, receiving of that same life. And so that's why I think that when Adam and Eve are no longer able to have it, it's part of it is a judgment against them that they are no longer in relationship with God in the same way they were before. Um, so that's part of why I think uh, that they did have access to it and did eat of it before, because I think it perpetually gives life, um, just as the Eucharist perpetually gives life, even if you believe in a spiritual presence view or a physical presence view. I mean, it doesn't matter. Either way, that's the same view. Is that the perpetual eating of it continues to uh, is continually life giving. So I don't know what you think about that, but that's
Yeah, my view would be similar, but quite a bit different to that. But um, it's now as far let's talk about the tree of life in the garden first. Um, or go ahead.
well. I'm yeah. So I'm just is so with your view of the Eucharist, does the Eucharist
Hmm.
continually, every single time you partake of it, it is giving you um what would it be? It's perpetually giving life. What do you
Well,
think?
it's giving you more. I think. Well, it's a lot of different things, and that's a big subject. But uh, it wherever God is in a love action, there's always grace. So grace is received,
Yes, but what is
and
grace? Is
grace is
grace
like an
life?
empowering. It's an empowering. So
So could we
um,
consider grace? Could we put it this way? Grace is life.
well. you'd have to qualify what you mean by that. Because
Grace, the
I
point
mean,
of grace,
I wouldn't say grace is life unless I qualified what I meant by that.
I'm not sure why you
So,
wouldn't, because basically what I'm saying is, uh, grace is what brings us into fellowship with God, and fellowship with God is what gives life.
well, you could say grace is life giving. I would be okay with that.
Right, but I would say, isn't that what the point of grace is? Is to give life.
Yeah, it's to make us act godlike. Yeah, to give us
Right,
strength
which gives us
to.
life, and that's what I'm saying. Similarly, could we not say that the tree of life could also function in the same way that, as they continually partake of it and they're in relationship with God, it is life giving, because it
Right.
gives grace. That's what I'm getting at. But you can go down your
Well,
line
what
of
I mean,
reasoning if you want, but that's just all I was asking.
well, yeah, when Jesus says that he's the way, the truth, and the life, we would say Jesus is life. Um, but we wouldn't say Jesus is grace, you know. And so, if Jesus is life, um, then to say life is grace, then um, that's why I
Oh
say it
no,
all
but it's the
matters.
reverse. Um, it's like the distinction between squares and rectangles. Um, just because a square is a rectangle doesn't mean a rectangle is a square. So when I say grace is life, that doesn't mean that life is grace. It just means that grace is actually a granting of life to the believer in every facet of his being.
Yeah, it's an empowering. It can be rejected, or it can be misused, or it can be ignored, but um, uh, it has to have a. But coming back to your point, as far as okay, so then the question is, okay, um, if I go to communion, does 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 let's say I go to communion every day, okay, is that going to uh, make me holier than someone who doesn't? Is that giving me something that someone else isn't getting? And the answer to that would be, well, it depends, because um, it comes back to how do I cooperate with that grace? If I'm going to, let's say, communion every day, um, am I going? What is the purpose? It's still going to give me what it promises. You know, just like baptism is going to give you what it promises. It doesn't make a mistake. It doesn't go like, oh yeah, that time it didn't work. We need to, can you face the east instead? Um, um, but it doesn't. It would be like me if we you look at like grace, like um, money. You know, I may go and get $5 every morning, but if I don't use that $5 for something, then I've got it, but I'm not using it. Or I've got it, and with grace, you can't misuse grace because you either reject it or you accept it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but um, but are you cooperating with it? So I'm not really answering your question, but the distinction is a little bit that it's uh, someone could say, "Well, I already have Christ in my heart." I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, "You have the fullness of Christ in your heart. You have the fullness of Christ." And on one side, you would have to bring that into context and clarify what you mean, because I think in heaven, beholding His face would be having more of Him. You know, so so someone could say, and God is not made of parts, right? So if but to say that I have one grain of God is enough to you know create a million worlds or whatever. So um, um, not sure where I'm going with that. Maybe you can redirect me.
Well, there's this idea of theosis, which is becoming more and more like God. And one way that you do that is becoming more and more like Christ, which you see said multiple times. I mean, because obviously Christ is God. That's not really controversial for us. But the thought is there's multiple passages that talk about us being conformed to the image of Christ. And so I
Hmm.
think that we could consider, and I know you said the Eucharist is more than this, and I'm not denying that there's multiple things. My goal is
Hmm.
not to just give one specific answer of
Right.
the entirety of what the Eucharist is, but these
Right.
are aspects of it, and one aspect is um, continually becoming more and more like Christ,
Hmm.
theosis. And
Yeah.
so um, the thing is, it's not as if you automatically are more like Christ just because you partake of the Eucharist. Like you're saying, you have to make use of that, and I agree. I
Hmm.
agree. You have to make use of it. Um, uh, I there's a lot of iffy things. Iffy, like of some distinctions between Reformed view and Catholic, obviously. And one of those would be the um, oh gosh, what was it? Oh, um, soteriology is a little bit different, obviously. But one thing that is similar, and this is a longer conversation, but the idea of sanctification, um, they obviously make a distinction, the Reformed do, between justification and sanctification. But as far as they they can refer to sanctification as being a synergistic uh, process, meaning cooperation with grace. They may disagree with obviously what that ends up, you know, being that obviously everyone that's elect will ultimately be saved in their view. Um, but anyway, I don't mean to go into the weeds there, but
Yeah.
just to
I didn't mean
say,
to take us there either.
no, not yeah, uh, that was my fault at this point. So where was I? I was just saying. Okay, so the Eucharist is like theosis. The thing is, theosis is um, actually being more. I'm not sure how I was applying that to life, but ah, I totally lost it. I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, every um, every act of obedience strengthens the virtue. Every act of obedience to the good, or
Mm-hmm.
uh, every relinquishing to a vice strengthens the vice. Um, so every act of obedience that we take through our lives has a strengthening factor because it builds virtue, and and because of grace, the virtues are lifted even higher and become um, supernatural virtues. You know, it's not just because an unbeliever can have the virtue of paying their bills, let's say, or the virtue of honesty. Okay, but the believer uh, is honest for God's sake. Not only is he honest, but he's honest for God's sake in a sense. And so it's almost like it's a supernatural virtue. But anyway, anytime we take an action in obedience to God's commands or instructions, it's building character in us. It's building strength. And so, you know, to pray, you know, is an act of obedience. That's going to build virtue, but it also gives grace. You know, to read the scriptures is going to, uh, and we can say with all these,
Mm-hmm.
we have to cooperate with it. You know, but to read the scriptures can build virtue, and can we can receive grace from it because we're seeking God, right? And uh, uh, so I don't know where I'm going with
Well,
that, but
I do want to return to the point.
yeah, go ahead.
Um, so even though we can point to all those things and the growing in virtue, I would say all of that entails the growing of life. Um, Life is not simply existing. Life is living in fellowship with God, in your proper order. Is the idea of what life is. is because it entails both spiritual life and physical life. Um, I think that when we see the fall happen, it's not simply, oh, you will die physically. I think it's both. I think it's you die spiritually, you die physically. And so I think death is both is has an aspect of both. Both the removal of our relationship with God as well as removal of our physical bodily existence on this planet. Um, and that's why hell exists, is because, well, okay, that's a different question. But anyway, so that's what life is. And so I would say all of that gives life. And so there's a passage in Romans um, where he talks about Adam being given life, and then Jesus become a life giving spirit, is
Spirit.
what it says. And so I think that everything that Christ gives us is more life, and is greater life, and more life. And so if we simply say life is simply existence, I don't hold that definition in this case. We can, because in a sense, saying life is more of an analogy, if that makes sense, because obviously we do say life is existing bodily, right? Obviously.
Hmm.
But in
Hmm.
this sense, in this analogical sense, life is um, more spiritual and physical in this sense. And just as life is having a proper physical bodily existence, life in this sense is having proper spiritual existence, as well as physical. So I don't know if that's helpful, but basically what I'm saying is grace is um, giving more of what is proper to human beings, which is life. And that life manifests itself in multiple ways, growing in virtue, growing in the likeness of Christ, which can also be identical to virtue, but may include more than simply just virtue, um, and stuff like that. And so, I guess just to bring this back to the question about the tree of life, I think, and I think that if there is that analogy between the tree of life and the Eucharist, I think you can make an argument for them having continually partook of it um, before the fall, because they're in relationship with God, and they're living in proper um, bodily existence as well as spiritual existence, and that's possible through the tree of life, and that afterwards, when they no longer have access to it, it's representative of the loss of fellowship with God, as well as being the lack of fellowship with God itself. Um, and so I that's one reason why I actually think that they ate of it beforehand, is because of the similarity with the Eucharist and the analogy that I would put with it. So I guess that's what the initial like thought was. It's just like I think that they could eat of it before, and that afterwards they couldn't. So I guess what do you think of that? I mean, you said you disagree, but I would want to know, like, why do you disagree? And or
Well, it's hard to get.
or do
Yeah.
you find that it is reasonable to say that they could have had access to the tree of life, and it could have that similar, uh you know, analogy to the Eucharist?
Hmm. Well, you have the one scripture that will be difficult to get past because it says, and you mentioned it, where it says that, let's guard the tree lest they eat of it, and it doesn't say unless they continue to eat. The to me that scripture kind of is leaning toward that it hasn't been eaten yet. Uh, and so that is, but that aside, and so that aside, uh, if we look at the Eucharist is giving, which is the body and blood, is giving us grace and life, which is necessary. I mean, that's why the sacraments match so well to a human. Is, first of all, you got to be born, but you got baptism. Then you need to be fed. You got the Eucharist. There's a similarity with all the sacraments relating to the life of a man from the beginning to the end, or a life of a woman from beginning to the end. There's something for each of them that is necessary in their life that correlates with some material aspect of their life, which is interesting. But so to say that, it's kind of that could be that they've been partaking of the tree of life. I don't think that's I don't think it happened, but I don't think it's unreasonable. The I don't think it's unreasonable, the logic of what you're saying, and obviously God, Jesus, God is more than a tree.
Yeah.
And so, you know so but then I wanted to mention too that, you're talking about physical and spiritual death, and so God came to earth to not only redeem man spiritually, but to redeem man's physical body. He
Hmm.
came to redeem the physical and the spiritual, because we separate ourselves out into mind, body, spirit, or soul, body, mind, or whatever, but we're one. This is what we are. We're not like, there's not some parasite called our body holding on to our soul, ruining it, and then once our our soul frees itself from the body, then we become perfect. That's Gnosticism,
Right.
right? Or at least a version of it. And so no, we are flesh and bone, and so Christ, God could have. We say that God could have chosen any manner to save us, right?
Hmm.
Uh, uh, but I don't know if it's Saint Thomas or the other fathers. Just says, but it was fitting,
Yeah,
that
that's
he became man.
part of that is
And
Anselm. Anselm has an
Anselm
entire uh,
thing on that.
dissertation on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just he came to rectify the flesh as well, and so when you were talking, that he came to do the whole thing, not just like and in order to do the whole thing, uh, it was going to take a man of flesh to and so he became flesh.
Yeah. Um, I don't mean to dwell on this point, forever, but I think
Okay.
there is a difficulty with the tree of life thing. I don't think that saying, because it doesn't say continuously eating, I don't think that's a good argument actually. But I mean, maybe you think it is, but I'm not sure that matters. I think that they could have eaten of it continuously beforehand, um, and him refer to eating of it once after the fall, not as saying that it wasn't eaten before, but just like it's not going to be eaten. And I don't think it needs to be in the continuous sense. I don't think it needs to say that. Um, like just saying, I don't want them to eat an apple. Let's say that doesn't mean that you also want them not to eat multiple apples. That can also be implied by that. I don't know if that makes any sense. But anyway,
Yeah.
the one difficulty would be, well, if the tree of life means fellowship with God, then wouldn't that just mean that they would have fellowship with God after having fallen? But the thing is, that's difficult for both of our perspectives, not just mine. That's a difficulty for both of us because how did you define what the tree of life gives? How did you define it?
How would I?
Yeah, how
Well,
how
well, the only thing we have, lest they live forever. So, is what they say is the result of the tree of life. And so I go a little farther and I say, uh, lest they live forever in the state that they are in, maybe. So they fell from the guard. They fell by eating the fruit. They were corrupted. And it's kind of like adding the quickening agent or the hardening agent to a glue. You know, the glue's a little soft, but once you harden or once you give it the hardening agent, it gets set, immovable. And so uh, I feel that would set that lest they live forever. And now it doesn't say this, right? It doesn't say lest they live forever in the state that they're in. It doesn't say that, right? But um, that's how I kind of see it. That you know,
I understand that, but this goes back to my objection before, which was saying, so before the fall, what was the point of the tree of life if they were going to live forever anyway? What was the point of it being there? Was it only not an artifact? That's not the right term. Was it only a preparation for after the fall, or was there something about the tree of life that was important before the fall? And what would what would the tree of life have granted if they had eaten of it
well, the
before the fall?
there's a lot there's a lot of things that we don't know. We don't. I believe the fall happened very quick. You know, I don't think there was months. I don't think there was years. I think it was days. But and so on one side you could go like, so we don't have a lot of information. If we had that kind of information, you know, because let's say they've been in the garden for a week, and let's say there's 100 fruit trees. Well, is Adam and Eve going like, hey, let's go on a, you know, some people go on a beer run or go on a go on a bar run where they go from bar to bar to bar. You know, I don't think Adam and Eve said, hey, let's taste every single fruit in this garden today. You know, so so that over if they were there a long time, it would seem really odd that they might not have had the tree of life. So then you go like, okay, there's not a lot of information in Genesis. So then you go like, okay, where is there information that throughout the rest of the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation? And so we think of the tree of Calvary, you know, is a really uh, maybe sheds light on what we might think of as the tree of life. You know, it says that when Elizabeth tells Mary that blessed is the fruit of your womb, you know, well, where does fruit grow on? Trees. And and then there's a lot of other Old Testament, you know, scriptures that kind of point to it tells us more maybe about what that tree is than what Genesis did. Because Genesis just gave us the name. And then it gave us what that tree had the ability to do.
Yeah, I have a thought, and I just thought about it.
Yep.
If we talk about the Eucharist again, um, so I think you can reconcile both ideas about the idea that it would uh, make them live forever in their state. If you think about they, let's say that they did eat of the tree of life before the fall. Let's say that that happened because they were in a relationship with God, and so they're eating of this fruit. And I think that the relationship of God is very obvious from the fact that He's walking with them. So for me, I don't think it's right away. I think it's actually after a little bit of time, um, because I think that the fact that they're walking with God means that they've already established a relationship at this point. And I think that's what the point of even talking about him walking in the garden with them was, is to say, okay, they were in relationship, and then afterwards they're not in relationship. They actually hide from God when he starts walking with them again. And so I think that what that establishes is that there was some relationship that they had, and now some relationship they don't have. Relationship to me um, emphasizes that it's not only okay now we're good, we're we're amiable people. I think it actually entails a a process, and that they were already in that process beforehand, and then it's disrupted by their sin. But anyway, so if we think about, they could eat of the tree of life before, and it would give life at that point. It would continue to give them the life that they already had, strengthening them in it, helping them to continue in fellowship with God, and that's what would be the fruit of having the fruit at that point. Okay, but then after sin happens, they would, if they had eaten of the tree of life afterwards, now they're eating judgment on themselves. Like, if you think about, where does that language come from? Where am I getting that language? I'm getting that from
Corinthians.
Corinthians, where Paul says, if anyone eats in an unworthy manner, he drinks judgment on himself. Well, what's this
Mm-hmm.
judgment? The judgment
Mm-hmm.
is eternal damnation, eternal life apart from God. So it is some life that they will have, but it's not a good life. It's not the proper life that they should have. And so at that point, if they had eaten of the tree, I think it would have sealed their fate, and that it would have been determined that they were going to be going to hell. I don't think, I don't know, I haven't really heard much talk about this, but I don't think Adam and Eve, I think Adam and Eve were faithful afterwards. I don't think that they are in hell. I don't think Adam and Eve are. I think instead the fact that um, I think they recognize God's promise, and that God would give them a deliverer. And I think having faith in that reality um, actually brought them back into relationship with God in a certain sense. But that's kind of like more of a side question. But I guess so. What I'm getting at is that I think that you could say that the gift that it gave before is proper life, and that afterwards, what the tree of life would give is actually condemnation and eternal, displacement, eternal separation from God.
Yeah, I think obviously the church fathers um, and have many commentaries on that, but I don't think there's uh, a definitive view. You know, you're what you're saying. Some may have thought, or suggested, um, and so there's not a definitive
Right.
interpretation or authoritative interpretation says this is the way it is. You have to agree with this. That's not it. But what you can say is certain ways that you look at that can have an effect of your logic or your theology down the road if there's a problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hold a certain position, that position may seem like okay, could be, but then whatever position you take there, somewhere down the road, that is either going to if it's the wrong position, it's probably going to tilt you in the wrong way on some other aspect. Or if it's in the right position, it'll tend you to stay in the right track. So those are the things that, um, when Arius said, Jesus was a good man, but he wasn't God. Okay, he's thinking outside the box, right? He's like, whatever. And they're like, well, no, that's not okay. And this is the why. And this is the reason. And this is the scriptural reasons. And this is the traditional reasons. And this is the reason because where it leads to. And so anyway, yeah.
Well, I think it's a little bit different, for sure. Uh,
Well, it's a different,
uh,
sure.
yeah, and but I think actually, I don't see what the practical ramifications would be of my view. I don't see how they could be negative.
Yeah,
Actually,
I don't either
and I know
really.
you're not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying, I actually see that the result of this is a continuity of um, the covenants. I think the reason why I also like this view to a certain extent is because I think it connects really well with the rest of Scripture. And I think it's interesting to see the parallels of uh, the Eucharist and the Tree of Life, and I think it's definitely meant to be there. Um, and there's always throughout the Scriptures, there's always the consecration to God, which would be, um, I'm trying to think of the best way to put that in perspective with Adam and Eve. But okay, so I don't know. I don't mean to go in super detail, but there's this idea of consecration, which circumcision and baptism are consecration. I'm not saying they're only consecration. I'm just saying that's part of it is being oriented towards God. And
Sign
then
of the covenant.
sign of the covenant. And then there's a perpetual sign um, in some sense, right? And that would be analogous to the Eucharist, the Tree of Life, and I would say the sacrifices in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament. And that those all
Hmm.
point to Christ. Christ is the ultimate fulfillment of all of that. But anyway, so I guess what I'm saying is I like it because I think it gives even more continuity between the entire Revelation, and I think um, I I think maintaining a continuity is important because I don't think salvation works differently in uh, now versus then. I what I mean by that is I think that we're saved by the same uh, methods, if you want to put it as
Hmm.
a method.
Yeah. Well, what you're referring to is the door is open. You know, um, you know, the people of the old covenant, they were faithful people, and but their faithfulness uh, kept them from being condemned to hell. But the door was not necessarily opened yet because man had to pay back the offense to God, which shut the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so and only in Christ was that reopened again. So yeah, so it's still you're still uh, it was reckoned to Abraham as faith. You know, his works were reckoned to his faith. His actions were reckoned to his faith. His grace was, or his belief
Righteousness
was reckoned to him as faith. His um, in
as
so many different ways.
righteousness.
His righteousness, yeah.
No,
What was that?
reckon to him as righteousness.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So in that, how has that changed now? Not, I mean, yeah, I think you make a very good point that it's not that much different, because when anyway, there's a lot of reasons why that is. But thinking about trees too, I was going through all the times that Jesus was talking about fruit and trees, and sometimes we talk about doctrines as being bad fruit, and that's really not the case. If you look at what Jesus says is fruit, and it's not bad to use that as an analogy in a sense, but it's not really accurate. When Jesus is talking about fruit and trees, he's talking about people as trees, and so either make the tree good or the tree bad. A tree either gives good fruit or bad fruit. Well, what's the tree? What's the fruit? It's the fruit that he is reaping from his believers. So, I mean, the reference is when Jesus is talking about trees and fruit, he's talking about people and the fruit that they have or don't have. And
Huh.
so if you look through each and every one of those, you'll go like, oh yeah, I didn't really realize that. It's not about doctrine. But again, I would say doctrine. You can say, okay, that doctrine is bad fruit. Well, we know what you mean,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not really correct.
Well, what I found cool about what you're saying There's multiple reasons why it's good, but one reason why it's good is you can apply that to Christ. Like if trees are always uh, referring to
People.
people in at least not always, but for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
then you could say that the tree of life could also uh, point to Christ, because Christ
Yeah.
is the tree in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
We should probably wrap up. It's like lunchtime, but
Okay. All right. All right. Well, good talking with Z.
you
Thank
as
you
well.
everyone for listening, and you know, um, look forward to the next time. And Godspeed.